allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, pursuant to the Open Public Meeting Act, the South Jersey Times and the Sentinel of Gloucester County were notified of this meeting, and it was also posted in the
Mr. Graper? Mr. Iglesias?
Iglesias.
Mr. Gaetano? Mr. Leo's asked to be excused. Mr. Garofalo?
Here.
Mr. Desari? Mr. Ketchum?
Here.
Mr. Hamill?
Here.
Mr. Felici? Mr. Borelli?
I'm here.
Mr. Winkowski?
Here.
Mr. Dachny?
Close enough to stop me from this here.
Thank you.
Okay, in the absence of Andy Gaetano and Russell Leo, we'll see our two alternates, Andy Hamill and Russell Lewis. Okay, minutes of the previous meeting, gentlemen. You will review them. If there are any questions, make a motion to approve. Second by Rich Iglesias. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, first on agenda tonight is ZB 22-06, the name of Vargo property. Mike, everything in order?
Yes, and before you do that, I just wanted to make an announcement in case anybody's here on an application that's called, I believe, Pyrotechnico. Was that on Garrison Road, Rosemary?
Yes.
Okay. Notice did go out for that, but they withdrew the application. So if you're here for that, that application is no longer before us.
Right now I have my attorney hat on. Yes.
Will anyone else be testifying? We'll swear on it. Mike?
These two guys here, Michael and Robert Vargo.
Raise your right hand, please. Be sure to tell the truth about the property. Yes. Your name and address for the record.
Michael Vargo, 1117 Little Mill Road, Franklinville, New Jersey.
Robert Vargo, 1131 Renewable Road, Franklinville, New Jersey.
Thank you.
Down?
Sit, you guys, have a seat. This application is by Vargo Properties LLC, seeking to construct a pole barn style garage as an accessory use to an existing residential structure on this property known as Block 2402, Lot 10. The variance requested with this application is for the expansion of a non-conforming use because the property is located in the highway commercial zone due to its proximity to Route 55. The other technical variances are for existing non-conforming conditions, being the lot size 1.4 acres, where 1.5 is required, and side yard setback for the existing house, which is not made worse by this application. These variances were approved on this property in 2014 when the structure was built. I'm not a member of Vargo Properties LLC. I'm the legal counsel, but I'm also a co-owner of Lot 8, which is an adjoining lot, which is represented by this flag going up here and then spreading out back here. So I'm available to provide testimony as an actual person that potentially could be affected by this project. Lot 7 is Bob, Robert Vargo. He's here, and Lot 8, which has a flag lot that goes out to Little Mill Road. That's our access. We share the driveway that's on Lot 7.
That's your home, correct?
Bob's home, and my home is back here. And then this is the property that's the subject of the application. The property was acquired from an estate, and the existing house was demolished and replaced. As I said, we obtained a variance to do that in 2014. There is no basement and no garage associated with this single-family dwelling that's on the property right now. So the current proposal is to build a 30 by 40 foot shed for residential use. Now, the question came up, what's going to be in there? And the application mentions it's going to be, recreational and lawn maintenance equipment, for example. And if any of you have driven past there over the years, you may have noticed a boat sitting out in the driveway for a long time. That's one of the things that's going to go in this garage, and hence the necessity, for the size. We mow the lawn. Some of the lawns of the property, of our collective properties, are mowed by a landscaping service, and some of them are mowed by us personally. So we have a bunch of lawn mowing equipment, and it's getting pretty tight in the shed, the little sheds that we have right now. So that's another use for this structure. The amount of land that is planned to be cleared will be the minimum amount needed to construct and grade the garage. That's estimated to be about 4,000 square feet if we go 15 feet on either side all the way around there. The neighboring uses here are all residential. Although the area is zoned commercial due to the fact that it's close to Route 55, there is no turnover of land here, and there's no commercial use anywhere around us. When we look at what the uses are on the adjoining properties, Lot 6 has one detached garage, Lot 7 has one shed, Lot 8 has a shed, Lot 11 has a shed, and Lot 12 has a shed and a garage, detached garage. So the conclusion that I draw from this, and I hope you do too, is that the garage is an appropriate addition to this property and comports with what else is happening in the neighborhood. There is an issue that we submitted with our application about the accuracy or lack thereof of GeoWeb regarding whether or not there's wetlands on the property. In 2014, when we submitted the application for the house to the zoning board to demolish the existing house and rebuild on the footprint, a question came up about whether or not there's wetlands on the property. We learned at that time that GeoWeb was showing a wetland on the property. We told the board that at the time that due to the construction of Route 55, which included the relocation of Broad Street, which had been more out here, and then it was turned and put in this way, so that Route 55 could be built over here, and I'm pointing to the west of the subject property. When they did that, they constructed a culvert under Broad Street, and that's shown on the plan. That takes the water away from there. So we contacted an engineer, and a letter was submitted with our application, wherein the engineer basically said that there are the GeoWeb in this. Oh, let me get you the exact. Oh, excuse me. You're right. Yes, environmental scientist said that there is. Sorry. Contrary to NJDEP GIS mapping, my field inspection revealed that there are no wetlands located in or within 50 feet of the proposed footprint of disturbance for a sample of the conditions within the footprint of the proposed pole barn. Refer to the enclosed wetland delineation data sheet. So we knew that this would come up because it came up in 2014, so we were proactive about it and got an engineer to take a look at it, and he did a full study. And if you guys don't have that in your packet, I brought some extra copies with me. Does anybody? Yeah, I'll have it. Okay, super.
Make sure you don't call an engineer, because Jim went to extra school.
Yeah.
He does have a lot of credentials, David Richter?
Don Brickner? Yeah. He's got a master's in biology.
Geomap, is that what you call it? That shows wetlands, but that's not accurate.
Right. Basically, it boils down to the fact that before they put Route 55 in, there was a large wetland there because there's actually a stream over way to the west. On the other side, now it's on the other side of 55. But by moving Broad Street and by building 55, it would have interrupted the flow, the natural flow of water that had been existing. So the DOT did put a culvert in there, and I have on the back of that plan over there, if you want to see it, the engineer's drawing, that DOT drawing that shows that they put a 27 or 30-inch culvert under Broad Street. So all the water that formerly sheet flowed here and kept going, it wouldn't be blocked up by the fact that they moved Broad Street over there, so they put a culvert there so the water can keep going. So the GeoWeb hasn't been modified since 55 was built, and we found out the reason why is that, and I don't know if Mike wants to speak about this, but the metadata for the GIS mapping says that they don't look at anything under an acre. And because the wetland itself wouldn't be under an acre anymore, they're just not updating it. It's too small for them to update. Mike can explain it better than me if you want him to do that. But essentially, our environmental scientist has determined that the GeoWeb is wrong. There are no wetlands on this property. Within 50 feet of, that's all he studied, 50 feet of that building.
Is that memorialized somewhere?
In your letter.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on page 2, second paragraph. Okay, so.
Yeah, I was going to jump in. GeoWeb is just a resource, it's a guidance tool. It is by no means, you are not supposed to use that as a clear determination of whether there is or isn't wetlands. It's a good idea. It shows up on there that you should do more investigation, and they did. You really can only identify wetlands by doing field work, and that's what this consultant did. And it's a pretty professional report. It has all the right language in there that I would be looking for. It's not an LOI from the DEP, which is the the certification. It depends if the board wants to take it that far. I would accept the report. It's pretty professionally prepared. The guy has all the training for identification of wetlands. It's noted in the report, he did the borings, he did the evaluation of the vegetation. He's not here to cross-examine, but it's a pretty professional report. Frankly, and the subject of this application is not waiving any sort of wetland regulations. If there's wetlands there, the applicant's still responsible to comply with its disturbance requirements and so forth.
It's not a big commercial establishment. We have many of those over the years, that's for sure. Any other comments?
So,
One question, John. So it's owned by Vargo Properties LLC, so is it a rental property?
it is currently being rented out to people, right?
And but the garage is not going to be for Vargo Properties LLC to keep their commercial equipment to service other properties. It's going to be just for the personal.
Right, for mowing that lawn and our lawns, and we also own another lot, 3 properties to the north. It's a 2.5 acre lot. And we mow all that stuff. Some of it we mow, I should say, and some of it lawn service mows. And that's what equipment that's going to be in there is for.
Is it for the benefit of the person living in the house, or is it just for the... My concern is you always make sure it's not a commercial building. I don't want them in the future to be a commercial building.
I'm going to say that.
Okay.
And I think they know that it's for personal use.
Right, it's for personal use only. There's no commercial operation going to start out of that. We're not mechanics. These guys are land surveyors. They're not going to start fixing cars, painting cars, or doing anything else in that building. It's to stick the boat and the lawn equipment in there. That's it.
I'll make a motion, we open the public. Motion by Mr. Silver. Second by Mike Garofalo. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Anybody in the public like to be heard regarding this application? Vargo Properties? I make a motion, we close the public portion. Closed by Dan DeSouza. Second by Mike Garofalo. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Just in closing statement, this already has a use variance. We think that we've shown that this won't be a detriment to the neighborhood, it's conforming to what else is going on out there, and we would respectfully request approval.
What about, there was a mention about the height. Is that,
Yeah, is the height going to conform with the?
Yeah, right, it's a 32 feet, and the maximum building height's 35, do you remember?
Well, I don't remember, I have the numbers in front of me.
Whatever it is, we're gonna conform to the maximum building height for the zone.
Maximum building height is 35.
Yeah.
How are you going to access it?
The access is, so, can't not necessarily tell from here, but Little Mill Road and South Broad Street were elevated to go over Route 55. When this DOT did that, they raised, this is up, so when you come in from Little Mill Road or when you come in from Broad Street, you're actually going downhill. So right now, we share this driveway, and we plan to use that access point for either one of us to get into from here. So we're not going to cut through a bunch of woods and create more impervious cover. We're going to just, whatever is needed to be to hop across this like 20 or 25 feet from the existing edge of pavement of the driveway to get into that building.
Is there any sort of cross-access easement that exists?
There's none on the record right now. That is something that we talked about, that if and when any of these properties would get divested from our common ownership, that we would formally, and we can do it now, it really doesn't matter when, a cross-access easement so that, he can get over there, he'd be crossing our property, so that everybody can get into that garage.
well, the only way the owner, the rental people would get in the garage, they'd have to go to your driveway, right? Or walk.
Right.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy. Like you said, it's going to be for personal use.
Right. There's going to be a man door on the north side of it, so,
And the garage doors will be by the driveway.
right, 2 garage doors by the driveway. I think there's another garage door on the west. And again, that's either whether you can pull through there or think into the future. If these do become divested, they've got already access through a door on the other side.
So, you heard the testimony.
Make a motion to approve. Second.
Motion by Andy Sutter, second by Andy Hamel.
And is that with the condition, your usual condition?
What's the usual condition?
Mr. Iglesias?
Oh, excuse me, wait 1 second. What's the usual condition?
Not commercial. Meet all the guidelines.
First of all,
Gotcha.
not for any commercial or business use.
Okay, thank you, yes.
Mr. Iglesias? Mr. Garofalo?
Yes.
Mr. Survey?
Yes.
Mr. Ketchum?
Yes.
Mr. Hamel?
Yes.
Mr. Felici? Mr. Graveman?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next on our agenda is 22-07, and this is an interpretation. So this is not the application, correct?
Yeah, let me explain it before we start. So normally you hear applications for development. This is not an application for development. Mr. Laney's law indicates that a zoning board can be called upon to make an interpretation of the zoning ordinance. So an applicant, if they want to get an interpretation of an ordinance, they can come here and ask you to make that interpretation. It relates to something they want to do with the property, but it's not an application for development. So in this case, they're seeking a large-scale solar farm, commercial, however you want to put it. And they're indicating that they believe it is permitted in the zone. It's our position that it's not permitted in the zone, and they need to file an application for a use variance. So after you hear the presentations, you'll decide whether you agree that it is not permitted in that zone or if it is permitted in that zone.
And then from there, if they needed a use variance, they have to apply for a use variance and site plan and the whole.
Right, a new application.
Now,
correct.
was the public notified? Is this not a formal hearing.
This
So
is a formal hearing, but there was not a requirement for public notice. But of course, it is a public hearing, because all of our hearings are public.
Okay, well, so was there anything submitted to you, Mike?
Yes.
That has to be, there's no notice given to anyone, so we don't have to worry about that.
Correct, but you had, with your paperwork, I assume you had what was submitted by the applicant?
Yeah.
And then you have what, the letter I had sent, and then I did actually did a follow-up yesterday with Senior Keith.
I am.
Did a follow-up memo to them, so if you can be referring to it. So I just want to introduce it so the board understood it was not an application for this development.
All right. And just for the record, my name is Keith Davis. I'm an attorney from the law firm of Niemeyer, Davis, and Goldstein. Our office is in Egg Harbor Township. However, our firm represents developers of real estate across the entire state of New Jersey, and we do a significant amount of work here in Gloucester County. I've just been handed this memorandum from Mr. Borelli. I have not had an opportunity to review it before tonight's meeting. I have not seen it. We did file an application concerning this development. My client is Gloucester Solar 1 LLC, which is the contract purchaser of the property in question, located at 1457 Fries Mill Road, designated on your tax map as Block 1902, Lot 1. As I just heard with the colloquy between your attorney and the board, this is a different kind of application in that we are here before you not seeking a application for development. This is an interpretation. It is purely a legal issue. And you as a board are acting in a quasi-judicial capacity as judges to look at the text of your ordinance and to look at the New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law and determine whether or not solar energy facilities constitute a permitted use in the particular zoning district where this property is located. If the interpretation is favorably granted by this board, you agree with our interpretation, and I heard what your attorney said, but we would ask that you allow us to present our case and our argument because we believe it is a convincing one that when you look at this particular zone, which is named the B zone for business, you look at the classification of uses in that zone, this is an industrial zone. This is an industrial district. That is relevant because under section 66.11 of the Municipal Land Use Law, which I have right here, which the state legislature approved, the governor signed into law, as a matter of law, in every industrial district, renewable energy facilities, including solar energy facilities, are permitted in any industrial district that have 20 or more contiguous acres of land under one common owner. And as you'll hear from our presentation this evening, I have a representative from Gloucester Solar 1. I have a professional planner here. You'll hear the testimony that we submit. This is very much an industrial district. We certainly have more than 20 acres of land. The land in question constitutes approximately 255 acres. And there will be one common owner, which we would agree to stipulate to as a condition of any interpretation granted by the board. If the interpretation is granted, process does not end there. We would have to go back, charge our civil engineer to hard engineer a plan of development, laying out the solar energy facility as we intend to propose. That would be submitted back to the board. It would be subject to a whole new hearing process that would be on public notice, because the municipal land use law requires public notice for a site plan application. So we would provide the public notice, we would come before the board, we would present the proofs, and at that point, we would get into the various site plan impacts associated with the proposed solar energy facility, be it stormwater management, traffic, glare, noise, environmental impacts. Everything that your ordinance requires under site plan ultimately would be addressed. But before getting to that stage, we're here before you to seek confirmation that this solar energy use constitutes a permitted use in this zone by looking at your ordinance and also by looking at Section 66.11 of the New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law. Now, as I indicated, this is the business district. And some of you might say, you have to be an industrial district. This is a business district. There's a case, Atlantic Containers. It's a reported Law Division case. It was reversed on other grounds by the Appellate Division. It's 312 NJ Super 213, and the Appellate Division case is 321 NJ Super 261. And that case stands for the proposition that the title of a zone is in itself not controlling as to the interpretation of the ordinance. In fact, that case quotes another judge who said, the title of a zoning ordinance is tantamount to the etching on a gravestone. What matters is what's underneath. You have to look at the substance of your ordinance. You need to look at the various permitted uses that are set forth in this particular zone. And as you'll hear from our planner, Bill McManus, this evening, you incorporate a multitude of industrial uses in this particular zoning district. And assuming you agree with that, that's the character of the community, in fact, you have existing industrial uses operating in this very zoning district in this community. Assuming you agree with that argument, we think it follows that you obviously meet the acreage requirement of more than 20, and you will have common ownership, and this constitutes a permitted use in this particular zoning district. But again, I want to assure the board that if you grant an interpretation tonight, the process does not end there, and we will have to come back to the board for site plan review and approval. Your professionals will review our plans and reports as submitted, and it will be part of a whole new hearing process. The reason why notice was not provided is because it's not required. And in the land use field, you only provide notice when it's legally required. Under the municipal land use law, certain applications necessitate legal notice, use variances, site plan applications. But they don't require it for interpretations, which is the only relief we're seeking from the board this evening. Now, Franklin Township has the right in its ordinance to impose a notice requirement for interpretations, but the governing body in this community has opted not to do so. So because it's not a requirement, that is why it has not been provided. With that background in mind, I have two witnesses tonight, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to offer. I have Tim Daniels, who's a representative of Gloucester Solar One, and I have with us William McManus, who's our professional planner. If we can have both of those gentlemen sworn in. Can you stand up?
Raise your right hand, please. Speak into the microphone. You swear to tell the truth about the testimony you're going to give this evening?
I do.
Name and address for the record.
William McManus, business office is 634 Lost Pine Way, Galloway Township.
Tim Daniels, 191 University Boulevard, Suite 667, Denver, Colorado.
All right, you can have a seat, Mr. McManus. Mr. Daniels, I'm going to call you up first. Can you first explain to the board what your title is and your role is with respect to Gloucester Solar One LLC and its relationship to NL Green Power?
Yes. So again, Tim Daniels. I'm a partner with Dakota Power Partners. Dakota was the original developer of this project, Gloucester Solar One LLC. The project is now wholly owned by NL Green Power North America, and we are under contract with NL to support their development efforts. So I'm here really as a representative of NL Green Power North America, which owns 100% of Gloucester Solar One LLC.
And are you familiar with the property located at 1457 Fries Mill Road?
Yes, I am.
And is Gloucester Solar One LLC the contract purchaser of that real estate?
Yes, it is.
And it constitutes approximately 255 acres, is that correct?
Correct.
Leading up to the meeting tonight, did you have the opportunity to, well, let me strike that for a minute. In terms of the development, I know we're not here tonight to seek development approvals, but I'm sure the board has some interest in knowing what the ultimate project would consist of. Can you generally describe that to the board?
Sure. The project, as it's planned, is a 44 megawatt AC solar photovoltaic project. It's pretty similar technology to other projects you've probably seen many times just in this area. It's ground mounted. It'll involve solar panels. They're roughly 3 by 6 feet each. They'll be mounted on a steel racking system, which will have piles that are driven into the ground. The panels will collect. There'll be a collection system. The wires coming off of the panels, they'll collect the power, which is initially is direct current. It'll run into inverters, and there'll be, let's say, something in the range of 15 to 20 of these inverters around the project. They look like a small shipping container, let's say, this on a concrete pad. Those convert it to AC power. There are then lines that connect the AC power to a substation that we'll have on site. At the substation, the power's, the voltage is increased to the point where we interconnect into the grid.
Can I interrupt you for a minute? It seems like you're proceeding, like you're going, like it's an application for solar on that property. Why don't we just get to the point where, what are the reasons why you think you don't need a use variance?
Well,
You don't need to hear about the solar power, it has nothing to do with anything.
okay, if you don't want to hear about that, we don't have to get into it. That was frankly my only question for this witness. But the question isn't whether or not we need a use variance. The question is whether or not the use is permitted. And we believe that it clearly is under your ordinance. Just have a few more questions for this witness, Chairman, and then I'm happy to move on to Mr. McManus, who will analyze the ordinance in question. It's a quick presentation, I promise you. Mr. Daniels, you understand that tonight's application relates exclusively to an interpretation of the ordinance in question. Is that right?
Yes, I do.
Do you understand that if that interpretation is favorably granted by this board, you would have to come back to this board for preliminary and final major site plan approval?
Yes, that's correct.
And at that time, you would submit detailed drawings setting forth the project that you just described. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
No further questions? Any questions from the board? Hearing none, Mr. McManus, if you could come forward. I know you have some exhibits with you, which we've marked in advance.
Mr. Chairman, is this appropriate place to do the exhibits? Okay.
Just get a quick clarification. If this board acts favorably, you go to the planning board. Yeah. Not this board.
Correct. I'm sorry. Yes. If I said this board, I stand corrected. I thought I said a board, the board. But yes, it would go to the planning board as a permitted use. All right, Mr. McManus, I know you've been sworn in. Would you please introduce yourself to the board and state your qualifications for the record?
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good evening. Again, for the record, my name is Bill McManus. I'm a licensed land surveyor. I'm a licensed planner. I've been a land surveyor for 36 years. I've been a planner for 35 years. I'm a principal in the firm of Duffy, Dulce, McManus, and Rash, and I supervise the preparation of the concept plan before you this evening. I've been working with Dakota Power Partners on this particular project since 2018.
Any questions about this witness's qualifications as a professional planner in New Jersey? No. Thank you. Mr. McManus, I know you're familiar with the property in question, correct?
Yes.
And it consists of approximately 255 acres?
Correct.
And it's located in the B zone, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Just quickly, because we've heard from the chairman, and doesn't appear to be a lot of interest about the nature of the development that eventually be proposed once to get on to the nature of the use in relationship to the zoning district. But I know you've prepared a brief concept plan. We've marked it as A1. Does it reveal what Mr. Daniels just essentially provided testimony to?
It does. Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, member for the board, for the record, this is A1. It's part of the package that was submitted to you. The property, I'm sure you're all well familiar with, on Fry's Mill Road. It's bordered by Washington Avenue, Jackson Avenue, and Grant Avenue. Basically, it's a wide open, partially farmed area with some wooded areas to the southwest, some wetlands along Jackson Avenue. There's a single farm-like structure in the middle of the property. Other than that, it's unoccupied.
Okay, so you understand tonight the application is exclusively for an interpretation of the zoning ordinance?
Yes.
Which this board has the inherent power under Section 70B of the Municipal Land Use Law?
Correct.
Okay. Can you describe generally the nature of the solar energy use. That's what we're seeking to establish on the property, correct?
That's correct. The solar energy use that Mr. Daniels briefly described to you will in fact meet the definition as established in the municipal land use law for renewable energy facilities.
And the property is located in the business district, correct?
It is.
Despite that title, does the zone allow for a variety of industrial uses?
It does. Your B zone, even though it's named business zone, does certainly allow for a wide variety of different kinds of uses. In fact, it allows for industrial uses, commercial uses, residential uses. So you can't judge a book by its cover. The cover of this book looks like it's business zone, but I open up the book and you can see there's a lot of different kinds of uses that are permitted in this zone. Of course, they're all prescribed by certain guidelines and guidances with respect to bulk standards and kinds of uses, but industrial uses are clearly allowed in this particular area.
And I know you brought what we've marked as A2, which is let's look at A2 first.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The zoning map of Franklin Township. And can you just note to the board where the business zone is located?
Certainly. The business zone is located on the western portion of the township, again, bordered by Fry's Mill Road. It's basically a north-south kind of a property. That's why it's ideal for what the proposed use is.
All right, and let's go to A3, which is the exhibit you've prepared that sets forth the industrial uses within the business district, correct?
It does.
Can you explain what this exhibit shows and what those uses consist of?
Certainly. As Mr. Davis indicated, this is A3. We've entitled it the Land Development Exhibit. Not a part of your package, but it's part of our application, or part of our presentation. Not going to read the entire purpose standard for you, but this is right out of your land use ordinance in section 253-114. The B district, the purpose is to recognize a wide variety of uses, paraphrasing, and in particular it allows for commercial, and I've highlighted for you, light industrial uses. So the general purpose of the zone is to allow for light industrial uses, and those uses are then enumerated within your zone following in section 114. I put some of those on the board for you here. We've listed 7 different uses that are industrial in nature. Unfortunately, your ordinance doesn't define what industrial use is. It doesn't define light industrial, it doesn't define heavy industrial, and typically industrial uses are basically defined by performance standards. Noise, vibration, glare, dust, things like that would differentiate a light industrial from a heavy industrial use. For instance, an asphalt plant or a concrete plant would be qualified as a heavy industrial use. Some of the uses that we show here, food associated business, would be more light industrial. We know that the governing body has decided what kind of uses would be included in an industrial district because you have an industrial district, the Pinelands Light Manufacturing Industrial District. It's the only district in your ordinance that's identified by name as industrial. So because you don't have a definition in your ordinance for what an industrial use is, we look to comparable uses in other zones to see if we can find a comparison or an equivalency. So we go to the industrial district, we find a host of uses there. Some of them are not necessarily industrial uses like administrative offices and business offices, but we find there's a host of industrial uses. Those uses we've identified on this board: food and associated industries, fabrication and assembly of paper and wood products, and so on. When we go back to the B zone where the property is located, we find exactly the same wording for a number of uses. 7 in particular are worded exactly the same. The conclusion that I've drawn as a planner, that because you don't have a definition, look to another zone, an industrial zone. If you find uses in the industrial zone that are industrial by nature, and they're included in that industrial zone by virtue of the governing body deciding that they are industrial uses, find those uses, see if there's a comparison with those uses in our particular zone, and as I indicate, there certainly is. There's an identical uses. Conclusion that I draw is that these are industrial uses in the B zone. And the bottom line is, what we're trying to establish is that the B zone is an industrial use district, which would qualify it for a municipal land use law consideration.
So let's go through it. So the ordinance in question is 253-113, correct?
Correct.
And that sets forth the business district and the permitted uses within it. I know you indicated there's a preamble, and I think it is worthwhile. You have that indicated above, correct?
Yes.
And the key language is that it's the intent of this district to provide for a variety of new uses, including light industrial uses, correct?
That's correct.
And light industrial is not defined in the ordinance.
Correct.
So among the permitted uses, you've identified on A3, if we could just note them for the record, first you have food and associated industries, correct?
Food and associated industries, fabrication and assembly of paper and wood products, biological, chemical, electronic, and pharmaceutical laboratories and scientific laboratories devoted to research, design, and experimental operation of equipment, fabrication and assembly of metal products, excluding the processing of metals from raw materials, limited manufacture of light machinery, warehousing and distribution facilities, outdoor storage of building supplies, contractors' equipment. The enumeration, the numbers we put on the side are the numbers from your ordinance, and as you can see, they're not in chronological order because there are uses in there that are obviously not industrial uses, as I mentioned before, such as business offices, administrative offices, and like.
And it's the same language in the PLMI, Pinelands Light Manufacturing Industrial District. All those uses that you just read are also permitted in the B business district.
That's correct.
And then in addition thereto, there are some uses in the business district that are industrial in nature that aren't even mentioned in the light manufacturing industrial district, such as 4, fabrication and assembly of computers and related peripheral equipment, correct?
Correct.
5, manufacturing and assembly of electronic products, correct?
That's correct.
8, printing and publishing.
That's right.
9, instruments and related products, including laboratory instruments, medical instruments, photographic equipment, measuring instruments, etc.
That's right. Yes.
10, hydroponics and greenhouses as part of a commercial operation for wholesale purposes, correct?
That's correct.
And then finally, no, not finally, there's one more. 11, special trade contractors, correct?
That's right.
And then 15, self-storage facilities.
Yes.
All of which, in your estimation as a professional planner, constitute industrial uses.
That's right.
So by my count, there's no less than a dozen industrial uses that are permitted in the B business district, correct?
That's right. Those uses would be my interpretation of what an industrial use is. In comparison with the industrial district, that's the governing body's interpretation of what an industrial use is. I agree, those are industrial uses, Mr. Davis had read.
And as a result of that, do you believe, by virtue of what the ordinance says, and this board is obligated in exercising its interpretation powers to impose a reasonable construction on how an ordinance is worded, correct?
That's
Do you agree with
correct.
that?
I do.
That's the standard?
Yes.
And that when you look at all the industrial uses that are enumerated in this code, it takes on a character of an industrial district. Is that your conclusion as a planner?
That's my opinion, yes.
In addition to what's allowed for in the ordinance, is there at least, if you identified an industrial use operating within the zone?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, in looking at the site, I hadn't been there in a number of years and riding around just to get myself re-familiarized with the site. I noticed on the other side of Grant Avenue, the Comcast building is there, which appears to be abandoned at this point in time, be a commercial operation. I would venture to say that at one point in time it was a distribution center of some sort. That would be an industrial use. And Byers Industries, that's the name of the business that's operating right exactly on Grant Avenue, or Fry's Mill that backs up to Grant, is entitled as an industrial use. It's Byers Industries. So those are uses that I would consider to be industrial uses in the B zone.
And does that amplify your opinion that the character of the B zoning district is industrial in nature?
It does.
All right. One thing we can concede, though, is that solar energy facilities, renewable energy facilities, are not listed specifically as a permitted use in the B zone, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Are you familiar with section 40:55D-66.11 in the municipal land use law?
I am.
And generally speaking, that's a relatively recent amendment to the municipal land use law. What does it provide for?
Yeah, it's, I guess relative is a relative term.
Yeah.
It's 2009 amendment to municipal land use law. 10, 15 years ago, the state legislature recognized that solar energy and renewable energy facilities were on the horizon, and they started to make amendments to the municipal land use law to accommodate those kinds of uses. They include solar energy facilities as an inherently beneficial use. That's equivalent to schools or to hospitals. They also allow for solar energy facilities to be on landfills and closed resource extraction. That was an amendment to the municipal land use law. You don't count solar panels in coverage area for calculations on stormwater. That was an amendment to the municipal land use law. And the amendment that Mr. Davis had just read, 6611, was added in 2009, and it specifically says a renewable energy facility on a parcel or parcels of land comprising 20 or more contiguous acres that are owned by the same person or entity shall be a permitted use within every industrial district of a municipality.
And how are renewable energy facilities defined in that section of the statute?
The very next paragraph defines it for us. It says renewable energy facilities means a facility that engages in the production of electric energy from solar technologies, photovoltaic technologies, or wind energy.
So the use as described by Mr. Daniels and and you, as you referred to on the concept plan as A1, does that solar energy facility meet the definition of renewable energy facilities in the municipal land use law?
It does.
In addition, you've already opined that this zoning district is an industrial district in your estimation as a professional planner, correct?
Correct.
How large is the property in question?
It's 255 acres.
So it clearly meets the 20-acre minimum requirement in the statute, correct?
It does.
And will there this land area that you've described, will it all be under one form of common ownership?
It will.
And can we agree to that as a condition of any interpretation granted by this board?
Absolutely.
Now, with respect to when the amendment was made to the municipal land use law, which says by right, you're an industrial district, you have this land area, 20 or more acres, common ownership, you're permitted. Okay,
Yeah.
It's not a discretionary issue, it's state law, correct?
Correct.
Were you able to look at any legislative history from the legislative committees approving of that amendment to further define what was intended by the legislature when that amendment was approved?
I did. And not unusual when we have applications that deal with interpretation, especially with an interpretation of a statute. One of the parameters for construction with respect to pulling apart the definition is to look at the legislative history. The planning literature tells us, the law tells us that construction of an ordinance or construction of an ordinance for land use is no different than the construction for an ordinance of any other type. So when we get down to drilling down to what the understanding of the intent of the ordinance is, it's not unusual to go back and look at the legislative history to see what the legislators were thinking when they wrote that specific law. So we went back to the legislative history. It's easy to do. Go to the statelibrary.org. They list all the legislation and all of the qualifications for submission of each of the statutes and the progress that the statute makes through time. And what we found is that the sponsor, the assembly sponsor for this particular bill while it was under consideration, says that this bill would permit the location of certain renewable energy facilities in areas zoned for industrial use. Uses the word use as opposed to the word district or zone. The state sponsor, Mr. Smith, says basically the same thing: renewable energy facilities in areas that are zoned for industrial use. Some of the committees that also reviewed the legislation, the Communication and Utilities Committee Facilities in areas zoned for industrial use was included in their language. And then finally, we found that also the Smart Growth, or the Senate Economic Growth Committee uses exactly the same language, renewable energy facilities in district zone for industrial use. So the intent of the ordinance is to allow solar panels on 20 acres or more that are owned by a single person on lands that also allow industrial uses. We believe that your ordinance allows, on this particular piece of land, industrial uses. Therefore, the conclusion I make is that this is an industrial district that qualifies under the municipal land use law.
And you indicated ordinance with respect to these committee statements. You mean the statute, correct?
That's right. I'm sorry, the statute.
For all those reasons, as a planner, this site in this zone, do you believe, looking at the ordinance and looking at the provisions of the municipal land use law 66.11 that you just recited, that this is a permitted use?
I do.
That's all I have from Mr. McManus.
Yeah, I think now that you're professionals, we need to speak to ours. So, Mike?
Thank you.
I don't agree with Mr. McManus's conclusion that the legislature's intent was to allow this anywhere that industrial uses are allowed. If the legislature wanted to say that, they would have worded it, any zone where industrial uses are permitted, this would be permitted. They haven't said that. They've said in every industrial district. So Mr. McManus admits that we have an industrial district. We actually have two. So he admits we have them. So, I mean, with all due respect, I think it's a stretch to say, well, you have industrial districts, which is what the state law says, where you have to allow solar. But the stretch here is, we're saying that if you have an industrial district plus another district that mentions industrial, it's allowed there as well. If the legislature wished to say that, they would have said that. They would have said anywhere you allow any industrial, you must allow this. They didn't say that. They said in every industrial district. We have two.
So that this would be permitted in the light manufacturing district, and the pilot is light manufacturing industrial.
It'd be a much stronger argument, that's for sure, yes. So the other point they make is that they're comparing all the industrial uses that are in the industrial districts that are being repeated in the B zone. But the important thing is that that's half of that ordinance. They recite those, but then they go on to say that they want to have a planned business and flex-use campus, business administrative professional government offices, banks, financial institutions. Then they mention a mixed-use hamlet, which is residential uses including single-family, semi-detached townhouses, multifamily dwellings, etc. None of those are in the industrial zone, so there's a very clear distinction. This is not an industrial zone. It's been set forth by our governing body as a specific separate zone for business district. So you have your industrial districts and you have your business district. The state statute says the renewable energy is allowed in every industrial district. We have those. This is not one of them. So I understand the argument, but I do think it's a bit of a stretch. Even more than a bit of a stretch, I think it's much too much of a stretch. I am aware of the Atlantic container case. I have it. I did look at that as well in advance. It's a lengthy opinion. One of the things it says is you can't just go by the title of an ordinance. That doesn't tell you everything. I agree. But in this case, the title is a full paragraph. And full paragraph says it's a unique opportunity to create a business flex zone and to provide a variety of new uses, including office, commercial, light industrial, residential, and recreation. So it's setting it apart. The governing bodies decided to set this apart from industrial. So it's a much different zone. The other thing the Atlantic case points out, which is one of the basic premises of the law, is that the general principle is that ordinances should be liberally construed in favor of the municipality. So if this is vague, as far as this argument is concerned, they're trying to stretch the industrial into the business zone. If there's a question, if it's ambiguous, then you go in favor of the municipality, which decided this is a business zone, not an industrial zone. When there's plain language, you accept the plain language. You shouldn't have to dig to pull from one to fit into the other to make it work. The memorandum that I handed to Mr. Davis, which was not something I had to give him in advance, I was just giving him something to summarize my position, which is the same as my letter to him back in December, which you do have, which essentially explains what I've just indicated, but I'd be happy to read it into the record if you'd like me to do so. But let me read it into the record to make sure it's official. Applicant is seeking an interpretation that pursuant to municipal land use law, the utility scale solar energy facility is a permitted use in the B business district. For the reasons set forth, it is my opinion that the proposed use is not permitted and that the applicant will need to apply for a use variance if they wish to pursue the project. NJSA 40:55D 66.11 provides that a renewable energy facility shall be permitted within every industrial district of a municipality. The applicant's position is that the business district's reference to light industrial means that a solar energy facility is automatically a permitted use. However, the business district as set forth in section 253, 113, and 114 is in fact a business district and not an industrial district. Franklin Township has a light manufacturing district as well as a Pinelands light manufacturing industrial district, which are clearly distinguishable from the business district. The business district is a unique district as set forth in the ordinance, which states in part that the area presents a unique opportunity to create a new business flex zone and to provide for a variety of new uses, including office, commercial, light industrial, residential, and recreation. At the same time, the district will encourage planned business and/or residential village development. The ordinance specifically provides for a planned unit development, including planned office and flex-use campus, as well as a mixed-use hamlet, which includes residential uses as well as commercial section containing all non-residential uses permitted in the Franklinville Village District. So even pulling that in is something unique. So I think those provisions clearly distinguish it from the light manufacturing district and the Pinelands light manufacturing industrial. It's important to note that municipal land use law provides the governing body with the power to establish districts and determine what uses are permitted in those districts. When a use is not permitted, municipal land use law provides an applicant with the opportunity to seek a use variance. And New Jersey case law provides that zoning ordinances are to be liberally construed in favor of a municipality, especially when the legislative intent of the municipality is clearly set forth in the ordinance as it is here. So with all due respect to Mr. Davis and his professionals, I think it's a stretch to try to make it fit here when it will fit elsewhere.
Just to add on that a little bit, I think between the attorney and the planner here that covered everything in a lot of detail, maybe to sum up what's before you, you're not trying to determine whether or not you think a solar energy facility is an appropriate use in this area. You're trying to determine whether or not a solar energy facility, as described by the state, would go here as an industrial use in an industrial zone. To get back to the intent of what the statute is from the state, by saying that renewable energy is permitted in industrial zones, they can't go through all 565 towns in New Jersey at every zoning ordinance and look at, some towns. Some of the towns I've worked in have over 50 different zoning districts that have, different classifications all over the place. So when they say industrial districts in a general sense, in my opinion, they're getting down to really the basics of planning and zoning. There's 5 to 6 sort of general zoning or land use categories, being agricultural, residential, commercial, industrial, and then sort of public or institutional uses, and then you can throw in open space or recreational areas as sort of an additional category. And really what your charge here is tonight is to decide whether or not the B district, with all the uses it permits, would fall under that general category of industrial, or is it a commercial use, essentially. And I tend to agree with Mike here that with the intent of the state to put it in industrial districts, you do have other very specifically industrial districts that don't permit the other things, such as residences and more very strictly commercial uses, although the B district does permit quite a few industrial uses. I don't know that you can say that that automatically makes it an industrial district under those broad categorizations. That's, I think, really all I can add to everything's already been presented tonight.
But you feel it's not a permitted use?
It's definitely not listed as a permitted use. The question is whether or not this district is an industrial district or a different district than it's specifically industrial district. And given the wide range of things that are permitted here, I don't know that it's fair to automatically categorize this as an industrial district the same way you would the manufacturing districts.
I know Mr. Wright, what you stated, you feel it's not a permitted use.
It sounds like Mr. Duffy's agreeing with
Yeah,
that.
generally.
When you read the definition of the business district, did you say light commercial in that?
It mentions it among, it mentions light industrial, mentions commercial, it's, represents various uses, different than the industrial.
Well, what solar farm consumes, light or heavy industrial?
Well, that's the point. It isn't defined, therefore, that's why I think what Chris is saying is the legislature said allowed in industrial districts, because they couldn't go through every town in New Jersey and try to say, well, if this fits, if that fits. The point was, if you establish an industrial district, that's where it's allowed. Not trying to expand it with interpretations as to whether, because an industrial district is mentioned in a different zone, this should be permitted. I think they kept it narrow, because that was the only way they could reasonably do it. Either you have an industrial district or you don't. In our case, we have two.
Mike, if I heard right, are you allowed to put a storage facility on the property?
Yeah, self-storage is permitted in the business zone.
Warehousing and
Warehousing is listed, warehousing and distribution, I believe, is listed as one of the permitted uses as well. Yeah, I mean, I can read through the list again if you'd like, I've got it in front of me here.
Jim, you have any comments?
Being a board engineer, this is strictly a planning and legal issue, but, no.
I know on Fresno, Chelsea has solar, and so does the Franklin Township School. Were they permitted uses there?
They were strictly for use by the school, by the school. What we've had so far is solar being utilized by a specific entity that they put in their adjacent property or on their property. They haven't had a commercial scale solar.
Rosemary, anything? I know we don't have to, right? But let's open it up to the public. The motion to
I'll make a motion.
second by Mr. Smith. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Anybody in the audience like to be heard regarding this?
Ralph Traveloni.
You swear to tell the truth about this testimony?
I do.
Name, address, please.
Ralph Traveloni, 802 Marshall Mill Road, Franklinville. I don't know about you gentlemen, but I thought that was one heck of a presentation these two made. I almost felt like applauding them. However, we call this zone the business mixed use, correct?
The business district.
Well, it's business mixed use. In a map that I have, it's maroon in color, and it's the only maroon on the whole map. We have highway commercial.
The ordinance is called the business district, but the zoning map actually refers to it as the B-MU business mixed use.
So I am correct. Okay. Again, it's a question of semantics. What is and what is not included in an industrial zone? We necessarily don't call it an industrial zone in this community. According to the applicant, they're saying, based on New Jersey 6611, that it is. Well, that's his opinion. And obviously, the board has its own opinion, and our solicitor and our planner has their opinion. In listening to the presentation tonight, I watched the level of the applicant on what they were doing, and they were building what I think is sort of an airtight case where they're trying to connect all the loopholes to show that it is indeed an industrial use. There's a problem. Is it an industrial use or is it an industrial district? You guys are responsible for districts as being the zoning board. Of course, it's an informal hearing tonight to see if they need a use variance. If this board denies them this evening and that they do need a use variance, they'll obviously come back and present a use variance. I don't know if it's a C1 or D1 or whatever. Okay. And that's when you'll decide. So tonight's just a preliminary action that the real impact doesn't happen until they actually apply for the use variance.
We know that.
I know that. But what I'm helping you to understand is they presented pretty much an airtight case as far as they believe. You may not believe it is an airtight case. I'm afraid that if you deny them, I can almost assure you that they'll be in some superior court to overrule whatever you state. So be prepared and choose wisely. Thank you. I know they do. You're welcome.
Anyone else like to be heard?
Well, my understanding is if we deny that use for that area, they doesn't come back to us and apply for use variance.
Most likely.
Or they should appeal our.
They can appeal, right, they can appeal the decision, they just apply for the use variance.
Hello, I'd like to, may I speak to the, I do. My name is John Donahauer, 2331 Dulcie Drive, Franklin, New Jersey. I'm one of the landowners, the property in question that they're trying to get the answer to. And as the last gentleman said, it's mixed use, like it is maroon, it's sort of like the only parcel that has business and mixed use. It's kind of an ambiguous zoning term. It's like, what can we and can't we do with it? So it would kind of be, I guess I'm asking for a clear definition. Like the township has had a long time to come up with what we can and can't do, and they've kind of left it open-ended just to, I don't want to say to make it more difficult to develop it, but that's sort of my personal opinion. With the township hasn't given us a definition of what we can and can't do with it. So, I mean, I would like to see these gentlemen be able to proceed forward with what they want to do. Being a resident of Franklin my whole life, it was just kind of, you know, how come the township can't give us a clear definition of what is permitted, not like...
I don't think in any of the zones it says solar is permitted, does it, Mike?
No, but according to...
There's a lot of other things.
Yeah, but solar is kind of new. Like when they redid the master plan, was it 15 or 20 years ago? I mean, solar wasn't even really an issue. So it's kind of, I mean, if say a warehouse went, we could put solar on the roof of it, like all the stores and warehouses do. I mean, that would be accepted, wouldn't it? That's kind of, if we put a huge shopping center complex, solar on the roof would be a sort of a non-issue, like Sam's Club and Walmart and all the other buildings do. So.
You're probably right about how the law doesn't define it the way we all like it to. That's just the way it is.
But so what does the mixed use business and mixed use zone, I mean, it's sort of open for interpretation. And that's what your job. There's a
clear list of permitted uses in the ordinance for this zone.
Okay, for the mixed use?
That's what they read out.
Okay.
You can't name every possible use.
Okay, well, I just wanted to, you know, let my opinion be heard that it would be nice to let them proceed and you know, it would continue with their plans. So, thank you very much.
Hello, my name's Theodore Kiefer.
Swear to tell the truth about the testimony you give.
I do. 320 Statham's Neck Road, Greenwich, New Jersey, Theodore Kiefer. I'm also a part owner along with John, and the only thing I would like to say is solar in general, for the township is basically renewable energy is good for our climate, good for us as a people, and it will, with the different interpretations of what we could do on the property, solar will not affect the school, by building homes in a hamlet, and it won't affect traffic by, having like an Amazon hub or something like that. So it's very, I think, minimal impact to the township. So that's the only thing I have to say. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I make a motion to close the public portion.
Motion by Andy Sedgwick. Second. Second by Mike O'Flynn. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, you've heard the testimony from the applicant.
May I have the opportunity to sum up, Chairman?
Yeah.
If you don't mind?
Sure.
Is that okay? Thank you. First of all, I appreciate your patience tonight. I know this is a rather unique application in that you're accustomed to seeing building plans and, reviewing stormwater and issues like that, use variance applications where you're weighing evidence, your discretion comes into play, and that's not this kind of an application. This is a textual reading of your ordinance and a textual reading of the municipal land use law. And we ask you to give a reasonable construction to what your ordinance says and to what the municipal land use law says. That's the standard that's before you for an interpretation application. In the public discussion, there was some mention of where are solar energy facilities permitted in the town. They're not permitted anywhere in this town, not even in your industrial zoning districts. Do you allow for solar energy facilities to be established? That's why the legislature adopted 66.11 to encourage these types of developments to be established in the state of New Jersey. And whether you agree with this as a policy pronouncement or not, because as the last gentleman from the public stated, it's a green renewable energy resource that is positive for the environment and does reduce our dependency on foreign sources of energy. That's why the legislature did this. And they do use the term industrial districts. They don't use the term industrial zones. So what does your ordinance say in this business district? In Section A, there are 17 listed permitted uses. 15 of them are industrial in nature. 15 out of the 17 uses in Section A are industrial in nature. And I know this is a comparison that is used often, and I apologize for using it here, but I think it's appropriate. If it looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, and it sounds like a duck, it's a duck. You may call this your B business district. It's an industrial district. You determine that not by looking at the title, and that's the Atlantic Containers case that I cited from, where you had a law division case affirmed for that reason by the appellate division, saying it's not the title. It's not what it says on the gravestone. What matters is what is underneath. And when you look underneath of that business district title, at the 15 of the 17 permitted uses in Section A of that business district, they're all industrial in nature. This is an industrial district. This is an industrial district that we believe meets the intent and purpose of Section 66.11 of the Municipal Land Use Law. We meet the acreage requirement. We meet the common ownership requirement. We're asking you, give us the opportunity to move this project forward, which we think will be a benefit to the community of Franklin Township. Let us develop a site plan and let us go to the planning board and present it. We ask for the favorable interpretation we've offered. And I thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
One thing I'm struggling with,
I'm going to have to respond.
one thing I'm struggling with, you could put warehouse in there, right? So Amazon could come and build a 1 million square foot warehouse and put 1 million square feet of solar panels on the roof, but they can't put them on the ground.
Right now, I don't think your ordinance even permits the solar panels on the roofs. They might technically need a variance for them, but right now, if Amazon wants to put 2 million square feet of warehouse on that site, they can go to the planning board for their plans tomorrow.
And their course of action is we approve that it is permissible, they would take their site plan to the planning board. If we decide it's not permissible, then they would come back here with their plan.
Yes, that's correct.
So then we make the final decision whether they can build it, put the solar panels.
Well, they would have to put on their case for a use variance before you,
Yeah.
yes.
But they would come back here with the plan.
If you decide that this is not an industrial district, then they would need a use variance, they'd have to come back before you if they decided to go forward with the application.
There would have to be a good reason not to deny their use.
That's a different standard, yes.
That would be a decision for another day, if it gets to that.
I mean, the question is not the merits of the solar use, though, it's
Yes,
just
that-
whether or not you feel this is an industrial district.
Yeah, we're not deciding whether or not they should be granted a variance. That would be, if you say this is not an industrial district and they come back, then they would present their case for that. But if you agree with them that this is an industrial district, then they can go forward with plans to the planning board because it would be, by state law, would be considered a permitted use.
That's what it's fun.
It was industrial.
Well, which is an important point, is that it was changed. The governing body chose to change it, keep industrial districts elsewhere, and it changed this to something that's unique in the township. It is a something. I just want to comment that the comment's been made that solar is not allowed anywhere, but no, solar is allowed 2 places by state law, our industrial district. So it is permitted by state law in those 2 districts, but not this one. This is the business district.
It's not specifically named in our town.
Not specifically named in our town, but state law has said that if you have an industrial district, it's allowed there.
So it supersedes.
Yeah.
You also said that this is light industrial at piece of property.
It doesn't say it's light industrial, no, it's,
Among other things,
Among
light
many
industrial is one of these
industrial, right?
purposes,
I
yes.
mean, the spirit
What,
of,
what's the definition of solar panel? Light industrial or
well, there is none in our ordinance. That's why
so what's the definition without an ordinance? What is it? What the worldwide definition of a solar field? Light industrial or heavy industrial?
I don't know that
They
that's,
don't make any noise.
yeah.
I don't know, most places, most of the towns that have a working definition, or you shouldn't say working definition, an actual definition of heavy industrial versus light industrial, the distinction is usually about how much of a nuisance the use is going to be. There aren't really that many heavy industrial places in New Jersey anymore other than some, say, power plants, but the original zoning was things like, slaughterhouses and things like that were heavy industrial, if they're really a pretty big nuisance with lots of odors and noises. So in this sense, you could probably construe that solar energy would be considered more in the light industrial rather than heavy industrial.
I think the only other comment I have is that, I know we're not supposed to be talking about the project, there's been a lot of talk about the project. If you take 250 acres out of this zone that wants to have hamlets and all sorts of a whole other page of uses, pretty much take a chunk out of the entire intent of what they want in that zone, which is mixed use. Not gonna have much room for a mix.
The only problem I have with that is somebody does own that property. Is that all 200 and some acres strictly that zone? That's the only...
Yeah, I think it's the key for farm, and it's, as far as I know, it's the largest active farm in the town, and for a while it's been zoned for this specific mixed-use zone to try and encourage some sort of development there. And that's where I think the flexibility of all these different uses gets into play is, the township has a long list of things that are permitted here to encourage development on this property, including residences, including smaller businesses, including some light industrial uses. The idea was to be somewhat permissible here, I think, about a lot of different things.
You can build houses there?
You can build residences or planned unit developments are permitted on tracts of 25 or acres or more, which is section B of the list of permitted uses. Section A is on 25 acres or less, is the light industrial uses primarily, and then if someone were to subdivide this 255 acre tract into say 25 to 50 acre sub-tracts, you can do light industrial on some of the smaller ones, and the bigger ones that the intent seems to be to do more of a flex use office campus or hamlet style residential development.
Thank you. official, want to say that?
I'm really troubled with what you go to the fact that, I don't know if it's considered light industrial or heavy industrial. You know, they said light industrial is approved now. What's the definition of the solar?
It's not heavy industrial, that's for sure.
The only thing is, it just takes up 200 and some acres. That's the possible issue.
But they certainly, from that plan you gave, you would never be able to put all those solar panels on. That would be allowed. Retention ponds, same way.
No, usually with a farm field, when you're converting the farm field to a solar, that's inherently reduces the amount of stormwater runoff, because you go from the agricultural field to like a grass meadow.
You said there was no engineering involved in this.
Sorry.
Yeah, there's, because we had approved one on industrial road that went through site plan approval, which was,
Yeah, no, they
took
had,
a lot of the land away from the solar panels.
was that a farm?
It was a farm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I do know that project, I knew they had very large bases.
Yeah.
That might have been the Highlands.
No, it's not mine.
That is the Highlands. But either way, you can still build the solar panels in a basin somewhere as well.
In the basin. I've seen that too, you're right.
And another thing I think about is the fact that solar panels are coming every place. You're not going to stop them. This is an open field, right, where they want to put those solar panels. Where do they go to Pineland and get approval to put solar panels and cut down 250 acres of trees?
It still just comes down to whether or not you think it's an industrial district. You know, whether or not all those uses combined still need to.
Make a motion. Whether it's a permitted use in that zone.
I'll make a motion it's a permitted use.
Motion by Mike Farrell, second by.
I'm going to second.
Basis. Okay. Rosemary?
So if I could just say, so a yes vote means that the use is permitted. Do I understand that correct?
The motion was that it is a permitted use in that zone.
Thank you.
Mr. Garafolo?
Yes.
Mr. Iglesias? Mr. DeCesare?
Yes.
Mr. Ketchum?
I'm good now.
Mr. Hamel?
No.
Mr. Gravener?
Yeah, I would vote no. You need to be cut, Mr. Shalici.
Oh, Mr. Felicia, I'm sorry.
No. Okay, so, 3 yeses and no. Those are passed.
We appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you. Good job, like I said.
Thank you.
Okay. That's the end of our agenda tonight. Resolutions, Mike?
Yes.
Excuse me, can I add one thing to I know the public portion's closed. When this gentleman you said about you could have houses next to an industrial zone, I actually live next to an industrial zone and I listen to backup beepers and trucks and dumpsters at 5 in the morning. So like houses next to industrial zone, that's kind of not a good mixed use plan. So it's light industrial, okay, but, oh no, I know, but just that point of having a housing, like mixed use, have like businesses and homes and, that's a great concept, but living next to light industrial, I do, and I listen to,
We understand it's your property, and I think if they follow the procedures, that's the next step. You're gonna be fine there.
oh yeah, I agree, I just meant that one point is kind of like, you don't want to live next to industrial zone. So having one large parcel with solar would be better than having small parcels with homes and mixed industrial.
Not required that you have to have both there. It's just
No, it's a
among the
possibility,
permitted uses,
yeah.
so you could do all residential there, or you could do all
Yeah,
light industrial.
it's just, the mixed use is kind of not the best use. So anyway, thank you for letting me interrupt.
Okay. We had, one of the ones that's not listed is Visconti. I did do a resolution for the extension for the Visconti Brothers Properties LLC. We had Tonya Esposito, Crawford, and Worcester, which the gentleman got in advance to review. One question came up with Worcester, whether it was or was not your intent for Mr. Worcester for that shed on the concrete pad to have a grading plan.
Yes.
So I had included it in that. I think some question came up as to
I
whether.
thought we were pretty clear with that he didn't need a grading plan. That's a shed.
Okay. Well, then that resolution would be, the resolution has to reflect what you did, so then that resolution would be amended to remove condition
Site grading.
5. Condition 5 says the applicant shall submit a grading plan for review and approval by the zoning board engineer. So if that's not your intent, then I put it in there mistakenly. The rest of them all are okay?
Yeah, is that all the resolutions?
Yes, there's 4 yeses.
Motion to approve.
I make a motion to approve all
Second by Jim Kennedy. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Second page report, Rosemary.
Just pretty simple, just gave a copy of the ordinance that we are proposing. Just the total of revenue generated for the board applications was $1,350. The total escrow for board applications was $4,650. Payments to professionals for the month were $5,775.50 to CME, and Mr. Borelli, $9,749.50. The township committee is reviewing the solar ordinance. I have a copy of that in there. And
Good idea.
yeah, and the state agriculture committee annual report is in your packets. You can take that home, take a look at it. And we also have a recommendation requested for the fair share housing, affordable third round and prior round. That will need your signature on it.
Motion to approve the secretary.
Make that motion.
Motion by Danny Sudbury. Second by Mike Garafolo, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? There's a motion to adjourn.
I make that motion.
Motion by Danny. Second. By Joe, all in favor? Aye.